Hello everyone, welcome to my vlog. Welcome back to my vlog. Today I thought I was gonna do a food haul because who doesn't love food? First things I got, it's no name brand because I'm not sponsored, peach yogurt. Ugh, love me some peach yogurt, it's so good for dessert. Second, this Tree Island fudge, not sponsored. I have to bleep that out. This yogurt, this one looks delish, just yum, but we're not sponsored, so I'm not gonna say the name. We also got this one. This one's vanilla flavored. The last one wasn't. This one's really good. It's Greek. Love that for us. And last but not least, we have this yogurt, and these are all really yummy yogurts. The ingredients are So as we know, many things are alive in our bodies, such as our cells, but things can be alive in our food as well. And obviously, those things that are alive in our food can also be present inside our body, which is kind of confusing, but we're gonna start with some definitions and some classifications. According to Carl Vuesen, there are 3 domains of life. So basically all life can be classified in these 3 domains. This is obviously an oversimplification, but we're just gonna roll with it. Archaea, bacteria, and eukarya are the 3 domains of life. Archaea and bacteria are prokaryotic, whereas eukarya are eukaryotic. Duh. But what does that mean? One of the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is that prokaryotes lack membrane-enclosed organelles, such as nuclei. So that's there are more differences, but just to keep it simple, we'll leave it at that. When we talk about foods and things that are alive, bacteria will pop up, and so will yeasts. So just to make sure it's clear, yeasts are defined as unicellular fungi, which fall under the eukaryotic domain. So bacteria fall under the bacterial domain, and yeasts fall under the eukaryotic domain, which is to say that yeasts have membrane-enclosed organelles such as nuclei, whereas bacteria don't. And there are obviously more differences than that. So to further sort of like define this idea of some organisms living in our bodies that aren't our own cells, or some things being alive in our bodies that aren't our own cells, I'm going to introduce this idea of symbiosis. Symbiosis, or living together, it's basically an interaction between organisms of different species in which one species, the symbiont, lives on or in another species, which is considered the host. So there's different interactions between both organisms, the symbiont and the host. There's mutualism, in which both parties benefit from the interaction. There's commensalism, where one benefits and the other is just not affected, it's not harmed, it's not benefiting from anything. There's parasitism, where one of the organisms is benefiting and the other is being harmed. There's amensalism, in which one is harmed and the other isn't affected, and there's competition where both are harmed. Those are some interactions, some species to species interactions that we're going to keep in mind as we travel through this idea of food being alive. And another quick definition, a pathogen is a bacteria or another organism that causes disease. So those are some quick definitions to keep in mind as we progress through. So you might be surprised to find that there are many bacteria that live in our bodies, on our bodies, specifically inside our gastrointestinal tract. As a matter of fact, there are more bacterial cells in our gastrointestinal tract than there are host cells. There's a lot of bacteria. So we're healthy most of the time because our body's defenses check the growth of pathogen populations, and occasionally the balance shifts in favor of a pathogen and we become ill. And even some of the bacteria that are normal residents of the human body can make us sick when our defenses have been perhaps weakened by poor nutrition or a viral infection. So before I give an example of an interaction in which a bacteria that normally just chills in our gut ends up actually harming us based on an imbalance, we're just going to figure out some classifications. So some classifications of how we approach looking at things. So our gut microbiota is dominated by 2 phyla. The Bacteroidetes, I think that's how they're pronounced, and the Firmicutes. I also think I'm not sure how they're pronounced, but roll with it. So an example of a firmicute is a lactobacillus. We know her. So bacteria are identified by genus, which is usually capitalized, species, and then strain. And this is usually all italicized. So for example, Lactobacillus acidophilus NCFM. That's an example where Lactobacillus is the genus, Acidophilus is the species, and NCFM is the strain. So there are different strains of bacteria. What is a strain, you may ask? Because I had that question. I was like, what is a strain? And A way to think about it, and this is like an analogy since our project is based off of food because we love food, is you can think of it like, so to find chocolate, think of chocolate ice cream, think of it as a species. It's a species of ice cream. There are different strains of it based on varying elements, such as the composition of the chocolate flavor. It could be white chocolate, dark chocolate, milk chocolate, as well as things like contained in the ice cream or like presented in the ice cream, such as like almonds, like chocolate chips, mint, like cookie dough. So basically, there are different strains of chocolate ice cream. There's not only chocolate ice cream, there's different kinds of chocolate ice cream, but it's the same species. This is the same with bacteria. Like there's some bacteria where it's the same species, but there's different strains, and some of the strains can be harmful to us, and some of the strains can be not harmful to us. So an example, and this is relating to before when we were talking about how there may be some bacteria in our gut that are just chilling and then suddenly it's like boom, they're evil. This is similar to that. So Escherichia coli, which is a commensal, remember back to the definitions at the beginning of this video, commensal means beneficial to the symbiont and maybe neutral to the host. Escherichia coli normally live in our intestine. However, there are pathogenic E. coli strains that can cause negative effects such as diarrhea and a bunch of other fun things that you probably don't want. Most pathogenic bacteria can cause disease by producing poison, either an exotoxin or an endotoxin. Exotoxins are proteins that bacterial cells secrete into their environment, and endotoxins are chemical components of the outer membrane of certain bacteria. So like with the ice cream, some have nuts, some don't. So how could bacteria be beneficial to us? Like why would I be walking down a grocery store and be prompted to purchase a container that has active bacterial culture on it? Like, that's like low-key triggering. There are many reasons bacteria keep us well, thus following are a few. First of all, bacteria can keep us well through this concept of competitive exclusion. Specifically, competitive exclusion by commensal or your normal flora in your stomach, or like good bacteria. So this discourages the growth of pathogens. So competitive exclusion, when we look at it, it's the process in which a dominant species prevents another species from using essential resources, so much so that the inferior species may become locally extinct. So you can see how that might be a good thing in this scenario, where we don't want bad bacteria, we don't want bad Escherichia coli, you know, like hanging out, producing those exotoxins or endotoxins. Our gut lining has limited attachment sites as well as limited nutrients that our gut bacteria competes with pathogens to like obtain, thus preventing like their colonization. So basically, good bacteria grow so fast, it doesn't leave any space for the bad bacteria or the bad pathogens to grow, seeing as they're in competition. Another way that the bacteria in our stomachs might be beneficial is because some bacteria can synthesize and supply vitamins to our bodies, because we ourselves, we can't synthesize vitamins, that's why we ingest them, because we can't synthesize them ourselves. As well as some bacteria enable us to extract nutrition from food molecules that we can't otherwise digest, like cellulose. Things that are alive help produce our food. What do I mean when I say that? Well, like I mentioned previously, there are two organisms of focus, at least for this video, are bacteria and fungi. So simply put, bacteria and fungi help produce our food through the process of fermentation. They are capable of fermenting. What does that mean? Well, very simply put, fermentation is when organisms, either bacteria or yeast, for example, convert carbohydrates into other things. So there's three common types of fermentation. There's lactic acid fermentation, there's alcohol fermentation, and there's acetic acid fermentation. Now these are relevant in terms of food because different products that we consume and eat are obtained through the process of fermentation, through one of those three processes. Okay, let's start with bacteria. Yogurt is produced thanks to bacteria and thanks to fermentation done by bacteria. An example of lactic acid fermentation, which was the first type of fermentation I listed, is seen in yogurt production. Bacteria consume the lactose sugars, which are present in milk, and produce lactic acid. The lactic acid changes the conditions of the environment by lowering the pH, which causes the structures of proteins that are present in milk to change. This accounts for texture, like the proteins changing accounts for the texture being different than that of milk. And obviously when you think of, or when you hear acid, you think of like acidic flavors, right? And yogurt is acidic. In Canada, the two bacterial organisms that yogurts are made with are Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus. Different strains may produce different flavors. So remember strains from before. Different strains. Some companies will add extra probiotic bacteria, and probiotic just means that it can have some health benefits, such as Danone's Activia yogurt, which has Lactobacillus casei DN114001. So the DN114001, that little quiz reminder, is the strain. But what about yeast? Well, yeast is also very useful in our food, and one of the ways it's useful is because it also undergoes fermentation. An example of alcohol fermentation is seen in the preparation of bread. So basically, yeast, which is a fungus, causes bread to rise through the production of carbon dioxide. So in converting the starch that is present in a flour, it undergoes fermentation, and along with alcohol, it produces carbon dioxide, which is what causes your dough to rise when you're making bread. So yes, please enjoy an embarrassing wrap.